There used to be food all over the floor, so they are improving it. Okay, so yesterday we discussed the halacha of a child who became a geyros when she was younger than 3 years, and one day she will be mutter to marry a Kohen, and those were the words spoken by Reb Shimon ben Yochi. He said that a geyros pchusa mibas shalosh shanan v'yamechad is ksher lekahuna, and we brought a raya from the parsha of Midyan that it's totally in ru'uyali boil. A girl who's not ru'uyali boil, she would not be compulsory to marry kahuna, but a girl who was ru'uyali boil would be compulsory. The Gemara said, how do you know if a woman is ru'uyali boil or not? So they can't do an invasive physical examination. So what they used to do is, by the women of Midyan, the Gemara tells us that the way they did it is they passed all of these women in front of the tzitz. And if their face became green, that was a raya that woman was ru'uyali boil, and they would have to kill her. And if her face did not turn green, the Yadua she'ein ru'uyali boil, this is the first wide line, and Daf Samach Amud Beis, and they were able to let her stay alive. Reb Nachman said, Averis make people's face turn green. The one Shmuel. Averis make people's face turn green. Now, there was another time in history that the Gemara tells us about where they had to tell if women were really boil. And at the last 3 words of the wide line, of the first wide line, in the Gemara and Daf Samach Amud Beis, the Gemara says, Kayotze b'davar ata omer, v'yimtzu miyoshve yavish gilad arba meyos naira besula, asher lo yadu ish lemishkav zachar. So this is the end of a very tragic story. After the Pilegish Begiva, where Klal Yisrael got together to wipe out Shevet Binyamin, they made like a pact that every member of Klal Yisrael, every Shevet has to be part of this force, this UN force, to punish Binyamin. And the people of Yavesh Gilad did not come. And since they didn't come, they were also killed out by the army of Klal Yisrael. But the women were left over. So what they did was women who were not old enough, Asher lo yadu mishkav zachar, women who were not old enough to be nevelas yet, those women they left alive. And what was done with those women, being that everybody was wiped out in Shevet Binyamin, they allowed those women to marry people from Shevet Binyamin, those refugees that were left over. Because there was a pact made as well that no one would give their daughters to the Shevet of Binyamin, which was a very harsh punishment, but in order that they shouldn't become extinct, these girls, these 400 girls were allowed to marry men from Shevet Binyamin. So the question is, Mina Yadi, how did they know with those girls which ones were Yadu and which ones were not Yadu? So Amar Rav Kahana, what they did was, they did a scientific experiment. Hayshivam al pi chavis shel yayin. They put these girls on top of an open barrel of wine. If the woman was a Be'ula, reicha noideh, you would be able to smell in her breath the wine as it goes up through her body. But Besula, ein reicha noideh. A Besula, it wouldn't work that way. So that's how they were able to determine which women were Yadu Ish Lemishkav Zachar and which women were not. Frak the Gemara, didn't we already discover a way to determine which women are Yadu Ish Lemishkav Zachar? We had it by the Midyanim, and they used the tzitz. So why didn't they use the tzitz by the Anshe Yavesh Gilad as well? V'navrinu lefnei tzitz. That's a tried, tested, and true method. Amar Rav Kahana b'Redav Nosen, because when it talks about the tzitz, the Torah tells us lerotzen lahem. It's lerotzen. Lerotzen lahem tzitz. Lerotzen v'lo paranius. We're not going to use the tzitz to determine who's going to be killed. Frank the Gemara, ihachi b'Midyanami. In Midyan, they used the tzitz to determine which women should get killed. Amar Vashi lahem ksiv. It says lerotzen lahem, which means lahem lerotzen v'lo paranius. When we're using the tzitz for Klal Yisrael, then it's only going to be used for Ratzon and not Paranis. But when you're using the tzitz For a goy, afilu l'paranis, there you can even use it for paranis. Amar Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, Amar Rabbi Shua ben Levi, halacha Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Halacha like Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, who holds the halacha like Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, who holds that a girl who's less than shalosh shanim v'yamechad, who's megayer, is mutar l'kahuna. Amar like Rabbi Zera, Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi. So Rabbi Zera told Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, beferish shmi alach. Did you hear beferish from Rabbi Shua ben Levi's mouth that he's patkin like Rabbi Shua ben Levi? Or did you hear Rabbi Shua ben Levi say a different halacha? And from that halacha, you were able to figure out that Rabbi Shua ben Levi must be patkin like Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Zaktim or my klala, you're asking if it's possible that I heard it from something else. Well, what do you think that something else was that would have showed to me, that would have revealed to me that Rabbi Shua ben Levi paskin like Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai? So I'm Rabbi Shua ben Levi, because there was a different story. Rabbi Shua ben Levi once said, Ir achas hoysa be'eretz Yisrael, shekara aleha ir. There was a city in Eretz Yisrael where there was a rumor about to passel one of the mishpacha in the city who had a case where there was a giyaris who married a kohen. Vishoga Rebbe is Rabbi Rumnas. Rebbe sent as a messenger Rabbi Rumnas to see what was going on. Uvatka, he found out what was going on in the city. Umatzaba bas giyaris prusim b'ashalosh shalom v'yamechad. He found, so there were people who were talking about in this city there's a problem with the Yuchsin. When Rebbe sent Rabbi Rumnas for more detail, what he found out was there was a bas giyaris prusim b'ashalosh shalom that married a kohen. And Rebbe said, Dechshira Rebbe lekahuna. And Rebbe was machshir lekahuna. So from the fact that Rabbi Shua ben Levi related this story should indicate that Rabbi Shua ben Levi passes like Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai that Bas Shalosh Shalom v'Yamechad lichatchila a kohen's allowed to marry her. If it's a giyaris, it's less than Bas Shalosh Shalom v'Yamechad. So Amar Lei, so his response was beferish shmili. I heard it beferish. So Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi said, I heard it beferish. I didn't hear it from this story. I heard it beferish. Correct the Gemara. And what would have been such a big deal if he wouldn't have heard it beferish? V'mechlala mai. Let's say he only heard it from this story. This story is a pretty good raya that even a kohen can marry a giyaris of bas shalosh shanim v'yamechad. Zok Gemara, that's not a good raya. Dilma shani hasam hoyel v'insiv. Maybe there the kohen was already married to this woman. So it was already an existing situation. So Rebbe wasn't going to make this family break up. He wasn't going to force this kohen to divorce his wife. So Rebbe said, normally, maybe I wouldn't pass like Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. But in this case, where there's already a marriage, to break it up, I'll be soymech Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. So you don't have a chloride that lechatchila he would pass like Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. So Rabbi Yochanan Dami Tavayin, Boigris and Mukaseitz lo yisa. We quoted from Rabbi Yochanan that lechatchila Boigris and the Mukaseitz, a kohen may not marry such a woman, but v'mnasa nasi. So you see, there's such a concept that there are hakpadas lechatchila not to allow a kohen to marry a certain type of woman, but if he did marry that woman, we won't force him to divorce her. So maybe that's what you see from this klal, that really lechatchila a kohen should not marry a giyaris who was megayer when she was younger than 3 years, but if he was already married to her, then b'di'evet we would be soymech Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Zok Tamar, that's not an argument. Hachi hashta b'shlema hasam soif eliyos boigris tachta soif eliyos bula tachta. Why did we justify allowing a kohen to retain his wife if she was a boigris or if she was a mukaseitz? Because anyway, she's going to become nevelis. Every kohen eventually his wife will be nevelis. Every kohen eventually his wife will be a boigris. So therefore we allow it b'di'evet. But hacha here, where this woman might have the halacha of a zoyna, just because someone marries a woman, it doesn't mean she's going to become a zoyna. So therefore, just because you would justify something like this, b'di'evet does not prove that you would justify this l'chatchila. And therefore, from this story, in fact, you do have a good raya that even l'chatchila, a kohen is allowed to marry a bas shalosh shanim a giyaris who is less than bas shalosh shanim v'yamechad. Because here there's no way to say that b'di'evet should be different than the l'chatchila. By Boigris, by Mukasates, there's an argument that we should allow it to be Evid, even though it's also the Chatchila. But by a suffix of a Zoyna, there's no such justification. So by the fact Rebbe was mattered, but the Evid is proof that it's even mutter Chatchila, and we pass it Chatchila like Reb Shimon ben Yochai. Reb Safra Mastin la Mechlala. Reb Safra said that Reb Yaakov didn't say that I heard it beferish. Rather, Reb Yaakov was relying on this story. Because and he had this question: how could you rely on this story? Why is it different than Mukas 8 and Boigris? And he answered exactly like we answered, that when it comes to a Shayla Vazoina, there's no justification to allow something b'di'evid if it's not mutter l'chatchila. Period. So the maskana of our Gemara is that we pass one of Shimon Yochai that a Giyaris who was Megayer when she was younger than 3 years and 1 day, she has the status of a regular Jewish girl and she's allowed to marry a Kohen. Ahu Kahana, the Antib Giyaris, this exact story happened. A Kohen married a Giyaris and he relied on the Shimon Yochai that she's not a Zoina because when she was Megayer, she was less than 3 years and 1 day. Amalei Reb Nachman bar Yitzchak my high. Reb Nachman bar Yitzchak protested that. How could you do that? Amar Lei, what do you mean my high, Reb Nachman bar Yitzchak? Amar Reb Yaakov bar Idi, Amar Reb Yeshua ben Levi, halacha k'Shimon Yochai. We have a psak halacha that I'm allowed to marry this girl because we pass like Shimon ben Yochai. Reb Nachman bar Yitzchak did not like that. Amar Lei, he said, Zilapik, you better divorce your wife. The Eloi, and if you're not going to divorce her because you're quoting Reb Yaakov bar Idi, Mafikna loch Reb Yaakov bar Idi molach. I'm going to pour Reb Yaakov bar Idi out of your ears. Kloimer Rashi says, Mishamtina loch, I'll put you into chayim, v'savek al korchach, and then someone who's in chayim, his wife can't be with him. So you see clearly that Reb Nachman bar Yitzchak rejected the psak of Reb Shimon ben Yochai. Tanya, we learned in the Brisa that Reb Shimon ben Yochai had some very interesting halachas. So the first halacha that we've just spent a lot of time on is whether or not a Giyaris bas shalosh v'yamechad if she's considered a Zayna. Reb Shimon ben Yochai holds not. There's another interesting thing that Reb Shimon ben Yochai said. V'chein ha Reb Shimon ben Yochai Emer, Kasabri he holds oiv de kechavim einon metamin ba'oil. So the halacha is if you have, this is one of the most famous gemaras in Shas. If you have a kever, the kever is metamin ba'oil. So if you walk over a kever Yisrael, no matter how deep it's buried, if there's a pesach, if there's no pesach tefach, then you go over the kever, you become tummy. However, if there's a goy buried there, you don't become tummy. So kever oiv de kechavim einon metamin ba'oil. When not metamin ba'oil, meaning if you're mahayil alayan, if you walk over them, you will not become tummy if it's a kever of a goy, but you will become tummy if it's the kever of a yid. Everybody knows, whenever you tour the old city of Yerushalayim, the Shar HaRachamim is one of the gates where it's brought down that Mashiach is going to come through. So the Goyim buried, they made a basic forest there because they knew Eliyahu Hanavi is a Kohen and they knew he can't walk into a basic forest. So because of that, they put Kfarim there. Their mistake was they didn't know this Gemara. They didn't know the Gemara on Yevamos Daf Samach Aleph Amud Aleph. They probably wanted to learn the Daf, but when they got to Yevamos, it was too hard for them, so they gave up. And there, if they would have learned this Gemara, they'd have seen that putting Goyish Kfarim in front of the gate wouldn't stop a Kohen because they're not Metamabod. Shenemar. Now this pasuk is the famous pasuk that I'm talking about. It says Ve'etin Tzoyni. Hashem says, I'm going to put my sheep, my flock, my dear Klal Yisrael, Tzoyn Marisi, Adam Atem. You, Klal Yisrael, are Adam. Atem Kruyim Adam. You, Klal Yisrael, is called the Adam. Ve'ena Oidik Echavim Kruyim Adam. Goyim are not Kruyim Adam. This was the main the main argument of the prosecution in the Mendel Bayless blood libel. Mendel Bayless was put on trial. This was, I believe, in the early 1900s or in the late 1800s. He was on trial in Russia for a blood libel. And they never had evidence because it never happened. So they tried using circumstantial. So one of the tiniest that the prosecutor brought was your own Talmud. Your own Talmud says, Atem Kruyim Adam. Your own Talmud quotes a pasuk that says that Jews are called Adam, humans. They know the Cham Kruyim Adam. well, if you don't even consider us human, surely you're going to butcher our children to use their blood in your ritual baking. And this convinced everybody because they're looking for a way to condemn the Eden. And this trial was a trial that was broadcasted all over the world. The newspapers every day were reporting on it. The courtroom was packed to the rafters with Yidden and reporters who were interested in the story. Yidden were davening throughout the world that Mendel Bela should be saved. And when this question came up, the defense lawyer asked Reb Meir Shapiro Zatzal, how should he respond to this allegation? So Reb Meir Shapiro said, every word in the Hebrew language has a singular tense and has a plural tense. The only word that there's no plural tense to is the word Adam. You could say Anoshim, Gever, Gevarim, but there's no such thing as Adamim. Adam is singular. What does that mean? So the defense lawyer told the judge, Your Honor, imagine if you just had a regular non-Jew who was on trial for murder. Who would be here in the courtroom? Maybe his parents, maybe a loved one. Would there be reports all about it? No, nobody would be interested. Here you have one man in our courtroom here in Russia, yet the courtroom is packed to the rafters with international journalists. Jews all over the world are talking about it. Reports all over the world. All the Jews are up in arms all over the world about this case. You know why? Because we are called Adam. The definition of Adam is unity. All of the Jews are like limbs in a body. When one limb hurts, the whole body hurts. We're unified. And that's what it means that we're Adam. We're not saying that you're not human. We're just demonstrating how the Jewish nation is like one person. We come together. And that's what the Gemara means. And that was supposedly a home run in the eyes of the judge, and that turned the tide of that trial. And of course, Mendel Beilis was exonerated.
It doesn't sound like a convincing argument to me.
It was a very dramatic presentation because it was very unusual to courts to see such a crazy outpouring. It was similar when we had the Wanunu trial as to whether or not they were going to pull the plug on him. They had to change courtrooms. There were so many Eden in the courtroom that they changed courtrooms and move it to a bigger courtroom, and it even moved the judge to tears to see what outpouring there was from the community. That's called unity. Because why do we come? Because we all feel like this is us.
Not for him, against him, wasn't it?
But in Mendel Beilis trial?
No,
they were all
the Vanunu trial was the courtroom.
I don't mean the Vanunu trial. I don't mean the Vanunu trial who gave up Israel's nukes. I meant here in Toronto there was somebody. I think his name was Uanunu. I think his name was that. There was a bacher who was dying in the hospital in Humber River, and they wanted to pull the plug on him. And the Yidden were fighting that you're not allowed to pull the plug, and it went to court. I mean, they never ruled on it because making a precedent would be too big. But at the end of the day, they asked that the community should go. And there was buses there. The courtroom was packed with hundreds of Jews from our community. So that's what I was referring to. Okay, so let's see the Gemara Vayter. Meisvei. So the discussion here is right now whether the corpse of a goy is mitama b'oil. So it says in the pasuk by Midyan, v'nefesh adam shisha aser olaf. It says how many goyim were there killed? Shisha aser olaf. But it's referring to goyim as adam. So you just had this whole Torah that the Torah doesn't refer to goyim as adam, and that's why goy is not mitama. It says beferish v'nefesh adam. It's speaking about goyim. So Gemara mishum behema. Since over there the Torah was listing off how many people were killed and how many behemoths were there, or how many people were there, how many behemoths were there. When you're contrasting humans with animals, avada, you could use the word adam on a guy. I wonder if he brought this into trial as well. The next line of the Gemara says that when you're using adam in the tense of human versus animal, of course a guy is called an adam. The only way you don't use the word adam on a guy is if you want to connotate that they're unified. But the fact that they're human, the very next line of the Gemara says that the Torah uses the word Adam to describe a guy when it's also talking about behemoth, so it has to make a distinction between a human and a behemoth. What about it says in Ninveh, It says by Ninveh in Yoina, we learned this by Mafta Yoina. It says Asher Yeshba Harbe, Mishtem Esrei Riboy Adam, Asher Lo Yada Ben Yamina L'Smoilai. So this is talking about goyish children, and once again it's referring to them as Adam. Again, it's Mishum Behema, because the pasuk continues and says Ubehema Rabba. Whenever we're describing a guy, human versus animal, there we'll use the word Adam. But just to use the word Adam on its own, that's something that's reserved for you. But Frekti Gemara, it says over there by Midian, Kol Hayeg Nefesh, anybody who killed somebody, V'chol Nageh B'chalal, never touched the corpse, his chato has to be mitayr himself. So you see clearly that even a goy is mitayr. So Gemara, that's not a raya. Doma iktel chadmi Yisrael. Maybe it's referring to if a yid died. V'rabbanan. How are the rabbanan who argue on this? How are they going to interpret this? They're going to say lo nifked mimenu ish. How could you suggest that someone became tamei from a mace of a Jewish mace? It says nobody. It said nobody died. So you have a raya here that touching a goy or that a goy has told. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochi, he learns la nifkad mimenu ish is la vera. What it means is no one did an avera. No one was chayte during this war. But avada, it's possible that Eden died, and when it says kol hareg nefesh, is referring to the mess, a non-Jewish mess. Ravina says it's not a kasha. Rabbi Shimon Yochai said that a goy is not metame ba'oil. But Shimon Yochai didn't say a goy is not metam at all. Sure, a goy will not be metam ba'oil. But if you touch a mace, you touch a dead body, if a body will become tummy. It's only oil that a goy is not metam. Okay, beautiful. Dr. Gemara, Dr. Helig Mishnah. Iris es ha'almana. We learned this case already earlier. A Kohen, a standard Kohen who may marry an almana, did erush an almana, and then when his manali is Kohen Gadol, then he was appointed to be Kohen Gadol. So the question is can he do the nesuin on this almana? So the Allah is yichnois he may. Umayse be Yeshua ben Gamla. Once upon a time there was a yid by the name of Yeshua ben Gamla. Shekides es Marta bas bisos. Umano hamelach is Kohen Gadol, and the king appointed him to be Kohen Gadol. If you look at the contrast between the lashon at the beginning of the Mishnah, you'll notice the difference. Here it says at the beginning, "Ir says Hamana vin nismana," which has a connotation that he was picked by his peers. But when it talks about Yeshua ben Gamla, it doesn't say vin nismana. It says umenuhu hamelach, meaning his peers would not have picked him. He was not the right man for the job. But the king dictated that he would be the Kohen Gadol, and the Gemara is going to address that later. The Chansa, and he still made nisuin on martabas baisis. So you see that the problem with a Kohen Gadol marrying almana is only on the kedusha, not on the nisuin. What happens if a Kohen dies and his wife, who doesn't have children, fell to Yibam to the brother, to another Kohen, and then before he had a chance to make Yibam with this man Elias Kohen Gadol, this Kohen became a Kohen Gadol, who may no longer marry an almana. Even though he did mimer, which is a kedushin, we know it's only midrabanan. He's not allowed to take her in because technically there's nothing there, and he's not allowed to marry an almana. How do you know that if one did erush an almana and then he became a kohen gadol, how do you know he's allowed to make nisuin? The yikachisha is extra. You could have said ki mitzula almanu grusha v'chalol zoynes el yikach ki mitzula me'amav, and the pasuk could have stopped there. But the pasuk adds two words yikachisha, so it's marba that he could marry a certain woman, and it's marba an almana if he made the kedushin before he was nesman as before. So why doesn't it also include if a woman is a shemer shavim to him and then he became a kohen gadol? Why can't he be kohenes her? So tomorrow isha v'lo yevamos. It says yikachisha, it doesn't say yikach yevama. And therefore, we only are marba an almana l'kohen gadol if he already made heirs. Ma'aseh Yeshua, Freikamar mano in nisman aloy. The word used to describe Yeshua ben Gamla's appointment was manohu, the king. One person was mamane, but he wasn't nismane. He wasn't selected by all of his brethren. Omar Rabbi Yosef Kater Kachazina Hach. We see here a knot of corruption, of nepotism. Rashi says, Kesher shel Rishoyim ani roikam. I see here a knot of wicked people. He was not a Rasha by any means. He was a tzaddik, but he wasn't on the level to have been chosen by his friends to be the Kohen Gadol. So how did he get the Kohen Gadol? He bought it off. The Omer Rabasi said, Tarkava de Dinri, 3 cobs of golden coins. It's a little fortune. Ilalei Marta Basbisus Liyanei Malka. Marta Basbisus gave to Yanei Malka. Adamukilo Yeshua ben Gamla the Chani Rabbery, and he appointed Yeshua ben Gamla to be the Kohen Gadol. So it's like people say today, it's not the greatest Talmidei Chachamim that become the Rosh Hashivas. Who become the Rosh Hashivas? The Yungalite or the Edomites whose Shveris paid the most money to get them that appointment. So it was similar to what happened over there. She wanted to marry a Kohen Gadol, but she could only get a Kohen Hedjit to marry her. She says, no problem. I have what to work with. I'll marry the Kohen Hedjit, and I'll already arrange for him to become the Kohen Gadol. Kohen Gadol Shemei Sechel. A Kohen Gadol who lost his wife, whose brother lost his wife, and now the Kohen Gadol has a woman who fell to him to Yibam. I'm assuming there's no other brothers, so what should the Kohen Gadol do? He does chalitza, and he doesn't make Yibam, which is very interesting, because if he's not allowed to, why does he have to make chalitza? Zaktimar, we'll see in a second. Kapasuk v'tani, it says the Kohen Gadol shemeis, Kohen Gadol shemeis achiv, chayil shloim yabim. So it says kapasuk v'tani, that his brother died, but it doesn't say it was this woman Arusa or was she Nesua to his brother. Since it doesn't specify in the Mishnah, we would argue that loish nomin eirsin, v'loish nomin nesuin. It doesn't matter if this woman was only Arusa to his brother or Nesua. Either way, he would not make. He would have to make chalitza. So nesuin, I understand if it's min nesuin, which means this woman is not only an almana, but she's also a beula. I understand why you cannot make yibum, because it's a say v'lois asavi. There's a mitzvah say of yibum, but there's a lois aseh not to do the yibum, but there's also an asay ki b'sulam me'ama v'gachisha. Ve'ein asay doicha lois asay. So that's why the kohen cannot do yibum. Elam in ersin, if it's only an alman in ersin, so there's a lois aseh alman lo yikach. But ki b'sulam me'ama v'gachisha is that doesn't apply because this woman is still a basula. So Yovei asay v'yitchas lois aseh. The reason why we don't let him do the Yibam is Gzeira Bia Rishayna Atu Bia Shnia. You're right. The first Bia that this Kohen will do, that this Kohen Gadol will do, would be mutter, because you have the Asay of Yibam being Deicha the Lois of Almana. But the problem is he's not allowed to do a second Bia, because once he does a second Bia, then there's no more mitzvah anymore, and he would be over. Therefore, we don't let him do Yibam at all. But technically, he's supposed to do Yibam, and that's why he has to do Chalitza. Talk to more about it. Kohen Hedjit. Look, the Kohen Hedjit lo yisa islands. The Kohen Hedjit should not marry a woman who could not have children. Ela imkein yesh lo isha uvanim, unless he has another wife with children. So we can soon see in the Gemara that a Yisrael may not either marry an islandess unless he has children. So the Gemara is going to want to know, why is it that the Mishnah expressed this halacha by a Kohen when this halacha applies equally to Yisrael? Even if he has a wife and children, lo yisa islandess, he's not allowed to marry an islandess. An islandess has the status of a zayna. That's going to require explanation as well. The Gemara is going to say the reason why it chapped on Kohen Hedjit lo yisa islandess is because of Rabbi Yehuda. Since the Mishnah wanted to say, according to Rabbi Yehuda, a Kohen may never marry an islandess, that's what it's talking about a Kohen. But about the ratio of the Mishnah is equally applicable to a Yisrael. The Chachamim say, Ein zayna ela giyares u'mishacheres v'shenev'ala bilasnus. An islandess is not a zayna, and therefore a Kohen is allowed to marry an islandess. The only girls that are considered zaynos are giyares, an eved who is mishacher, and someone who is nevelas bilasnus. That does not include an islandess. Omer le Resh Galusa Rapuna. The Resh Galusa told Rapuna, my time, what's the reason why a person should not marry an islandess? Mishum Peri of Arabia, because there's a mitzvah of Peri of Arabia, and if one marries an islandess, he's not going to have children. It seems in our Mishnah that this halacha is only applicable to a Kohen. But if the reason is because of Perya Berivia, then even in Israel should not be able to marry an islandess. Why did the Tana use the Kohen as an example to talk about the prohibition of marrying an islandess? It's because of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda, even if you've already dealt with the mitzvah puravu, and now you don't need to have a wife who could produce children for you, still lo yisa islandess Yerushalayim hamur b'torah. So you see that if it's a question of puravu, of course a Yisrael is included in that restriction. But once there's no problem of puravu, according to Rabbi Yehuda, only a kohen may not marry an islandess because she's a zayin. Zok to Gemara, da zayna kohanim udamifkedi v'Yisrael lemifkedi. A zayna is allowed to be married to a Yisrael. She's just not allowed to be married to a kohen. So that's why the case of the Mishnah was with a kohen. Amar, in my time with Rabbi Yehuda, what is the reason why Rabbi Yehuda holds that an almana has the status of a zayna? Zok to Gemara, it says in the pasuk, achlu v'lo yispu. He ate and he's not satisfied. He wants more and more. His new v'lo yifroitzu. He did znus and he didn't do yifroitzu. What does yifroitzu mean? Yifroitzu means that the ArScroll teaches it. I saw yesterday where he teaches it. I forgot the word that he uses, but it means it's to eventually have children. Called bia she'ein ba pirza. If the bia does not lead to a pirza, I'm sorry. No, not say that. Proliferate, right? Pirza means to proliferate. Miloshin uvineshel paru v'yishritzu. I guess from paru. But it means to proliferate. So if the bia will not lead to proliferation, that's called hiznu. In the pasuk, it's called hiznu. It's called znus. Called bia shem bepirza ein elabilas znus. So therefore, someone who's living with an islandess, the bia will not lead to children. Therefore, that's called a bia snus. It's a very strict way of looking at it. Tanya Rabbi Eliezer says, "Kohen lo yisas aktana." A kohen may not marry aktana. So this is a very big shaila. If a bia that will not lead to having children is called a bia snus, so what about a ktan? So that they answer quite easily. It's eventually she's going to grow older and she'll be able to have children. So it doesn't mean that this bia has to have an option to have a child. It means that this woman has to eventually be able to have a child. Not every bia is going to automatically lead to a pregnancy. But
you
where
don't
the
know,
shaila
maybe
is, what
she'll
about
be an
marriage?
islandess.
I'm sorry?
Maybe she'll be an islandess.
The Gemara is going to discuss that if you're choshesh l'miuta. Very, very good question. Bang on. That's exactly what the Gemara is going to discuss. But the other question is a man allowed to marry a woman who's post-menopause? There it also wouldn't lead to children. And the Vada Kohen is allowed to marry an older woman. So there's Torah about it. Anyway, so now we're going to get to a Victor Shaib. Tanya Belazar Omer Kohen lo yisas aktan. Why not? Omer Reb Chisda the Rabba puk ayin ba. Reb Chisda warned Rabba, go look into it. Make sure you get a clear explanation and understanding as to why Rabbi Eliezer said Kohen lo yisas islanders. You know why? Because the Lo'urta boiler Rav Huna minach. Tonight there's going to be a faher in the Besmedrash, and Rav Huna is going to ask you in the faher why a Kohen should not marry a Knana. So Nofak, he went out, Ainba, he looked into it, and this is what he found. He found exactly like what a Vigor said. Rabbi Eliezer Sabalak Reb Meir. Rabbi Eliezer holds like Reb Meir, who's Chayish from Yuta, exactly like what a Vigor said, maybe she'll be an islandess. For Sabalak Reb Yehuda, and he holds like Reb Yehuda that a Kohen may not marry an islandess. Sabalak Reb Meir, he holds like Reb Meir the Chayish from Yuta, that you have to be Choshish, maybe this Katana will be found to be an islandess. For Sabalak Reb Yehuda, the islandess Zoyna Havya, and he holds like Reb Yehuda who holds that an islandess is a din of a Zoyna because it's a bia that cannot lead to a pregnancy. Frank the Gemara, are you saying that Rabbi Eliezer is Chayish L'miyuta like Reb Meir? Reb Meir mi Savarla? Are you actually saying that? I'll prove to you that Rabbi Eliezer is not Chayish L'miyuta like Reb Meir. But Tanya we learn, Katan u'Ketana, a Katan and a Ketana loy cholten v'loy miyab. So what happens if the Almana who died without children was a Ketana, or the Almana could have been a Gdoila, but the brother who's supposed to do the Yibam is a Katan. Loy Chalton, V'loy Miyabmin. They don't do Chalitza, nor do the Yibam, Divi Reb Meir. So Amalei Reb Meir. Reb Meir's colleagues told him, Yofa Amarta Shein Chalton. I understand why you don't do Chalitza. Because Ish Ksiv Beparsha. It says Ish does the Yibam, and you makshin on Ishal Ish, and we makish Ishal Ish, which means that Chalitza can only be done by a man and an adult, and if it's not an adult, Chalitza won't work. So I understand why you said in Chalitza. Why can't Yibam occur with a katan or a kana? So what did the mayor answer? Amalei katan shema yimtza saris, ketana shema timza islandness, v'nimtzu pagin be'erba. Because if one of them is an islandness or a saris, then the Yibam is not a mitzvah, and now it's an Isra Eshuzach, Shaloi b'makam mitzvah. So this is where a mayor shows I'm Chayish Lemiyuta, a regular katan, I won't let do Yibam, maybe he'll be a saris, a regular katan, I won't let you do Yibam, maybe she'll be an islandness. But you cannot say that Rabbi Eliezer subscribes to this shita, because with Betanya we learned Ketana misyabem is veinachel. This never Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer specifically argues on Rabbi Meir, and the Yolta Ketana Kudu Yibam. So the fact that the Yolta Ketana Kudu Yibam proves that he's not choshish l'miyuta. So therefore he's not choshish. This woman would be an islandess. So by the same token, why can't a Kohen marry a Ketana? So we need to discover what is the reason for that. But the Gemara is not finished yet attacking the first svar that was said. The first svar that was said was Savalak Reb Meir v'Savalak Reb Yehuda. So first we proved that Rabbi Eliezer does not hold like Reb Meir. Now we're going to prove that he doesn't hold like Reb Yehuda either. Does Rabbi Eliezer hold that a islandess has a din of a zoina? Well, Tanya, we learned the Brisa. Zoina is zoina kishma diver Rabbi Eliezer. A zoina is a zoina kishma. What does that mean, zoina kishma? Zot Rashi, zoina means she strayed away. Rashi Kishma says, Loshen Toya. She strayed away. She Toya mitachas baila la'cherim. She turned away from her husband to others. The Rabbi Eliezer a zoina la'esheshish. According to Rabbi Eliezer, the only woman that's considered a zoina is an eshezinsa, not an islandess. So now we're at a loss. Why did Rabbi Eliezer say that a kohen should not marry a katana? And we'll get back to that. But now we're going to learn a whole bunch of different shittas as to what makes a woman into a zoina. So Rabbi Eliezer holds it's dafin eshezinsa. Rabbi Kiva Imer zoina zu move keres. It means a woman who is even a pnuya, even if she was never married, but she sleeps around. A woman who regularly sleeps around, that is considered a zoina. Rabbi Masih ben Charash Imer afilu halach baila lashkoisa. She's even a zoina if there was a shot on her that she was mezana. She made kino in stira. A woman is innocent until proven guilty. So even after kino and stira, she still does not yet have a status of a zoina. But then the husband had an isser lav. He wasn't allowed to be ba upon her once she's a suffix of saita. Her husband illegally had relations with her, asa zoina. So that's even a regular lav, even that makes her into a zoina. That's more stringent. Rabbi Yehuda is the most stringent, and he says zoina zu islandess. So these are all the different opinions. And then you have Rabbi Lazar. This is not our Rabbi Eliezer. This is Rabbi Lazar says, and this is very stringent as well, that even a panu and a pnuya, that would also be a zoina, which we learned in the Tosh Rishonim that we don't pass. Ella, Amar Rabbi Baba. So now we're at a loss. Why is it that Rabbi Eliezer said that a kohen should not marry a katana? What is the problem with a kohen marrying a katana? It can't be because of idleness, because clearly that's not what Rabbi Eliezer holds. When Rabbi Eliezer said that a kohen shouldn't marry a katana, he didn't mean a regular kohen. A regular kohen is allowed to marry a katana. A kohen Gadol is not allowed to marry a katana. Why? Because la'emes kanila. When will he be kinder? That's only when she's a gedola. That's when she will be considered his wife, really. Rashi says, why? The kiddush tana lav klumah. You can't be mekadosh tana. Therefore, if he marries her and has relations with her, he really made her into a beula before his real kidney is schal. So this is a very difficult thing to understand. There's many kashas on this, because why isn't it a good kedushin? So right away, Rava jumped on this svara. Amar Rava, machle leid. This is somebody who's you're messing up the heart. You're totally off. It's completely not true what you're saying. Because if the way the Kohen Gadol married this girl is because she was a Tana and her father was Makabel Kedushin for her, well then he's shy to the Kanila. So she's 100% his wife, and there's no reason why there should be a problem. And if you're saying that she was Makabel Kedushin for herself, and therefore there's no Chalosh Kedushin, because she can't be Makabel her own Kedushin, Rabbi Eliezer, V'loi Rabbanan. We're going according to Rabbi Eliezer and not to Rabbanan. What did Rabbi Eliezer tell us? What's considered a Zaina? Rabbi Eliezer said, what is considered a Zaina? Let's look back over here. It's Zaina Kishma. An Eisha Shisha was Mazana. This is not an Eisha Shish. So what is going to be the problem? Zakta Gemara. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. What I said was very bad. Vida kitchen nafsha. If she was mekadosh herself, Rabbi Eliezer v'loy Rabbanan, she's now a ba'ula. So everybody would agree. It's not only Rabbi Eliezer. Everybody would agree that a Kohen Gadol could not marry a Ketana, because when he did the marriage, it was no marriage. Come to Chay, she's a ba'ula. So it's not only Rabbi Eliezer who wouldn't allow a Kohen Gadol to marry such a girl. Nobody would allow a Kohen Gadol to marry such a girl, because she's a ba'ula, and he didn't marry her until after she was a ba'ula. Let's see Rashi. The Katani who said earlier, Rabbi Eliezer, which is mashma. Only Rabbi Eliezer has this chumrah, but everybody else would disagree. Nobody would argue, because the kedushin wasn't the kedushin. He was baalel. She became a ba'ula, and later on he wants to make a real kedushin. Nobody would agree that would work. So we need to find a reason why only Rabbi Eliezer would hold that a kohen cannot marry a ketana. So let's go back to a Kohen Hedyu. Rabbi Eliezer says a Kohen Hedyu cannot marry a Ketana. It's not a real Issur D'Oraisa. The reason why we say a Kohen shouldn't marry a little girl, because a little girl could easily get strayed, get lured away, and end up becoming a Zaina. And therefore, stay away from little girls, because little girls won't have a sense. Marry mature women who will protect themselves. In fact, the Gemara, so then no one should marry a young girl. Everybody should only marry mature women who are smart enough not to get sucked in. If a ketana becomes a mafuta, that's considered an oinus. It's called statutory rape. And therefore she would not become usher to her husband. But a kohen whose wife, even if she's nanas, he wouldn't be able to continue living with her, so it's too dangerous. The oinus be Yisrael, Mr. Shari. If a Yisrael is married to a woman and she's nanas, then she will still be mutter to her husband. Let me just rush through the next couple of lines so we can get to the Mishnah. It's with a Kohen Gadol, the high Tanahu, and the reason why Rabbi Eliezer says a Kohen Gadol shouldn't marry Tana is because of this Tana. The Tanya Besula. Yachol Tana, you might think a Kohen Gadol can marry Tana. Tamadaimer Isha. Isha Yachol Boigris. Maybe he could marry a Boigris. Tamadaimer Besula. Okay, it's that. Yotisam Michal Katnis, Ulchal Bagers, Loi Bosa. Who could she? He has to marry a woman who's not a Tana anymore, but not a Bagris either. It has to be a Naira. So he actually learns it from a pasuk that a Kohen Gadol shouldn't marry such a young woman. That's Pshat Rabbi Eliezer. A Kohen Gadol is not allowed to marry a Tana. He has to marry B'dafka Naira. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar Hai Tanu, the Tanya B'tsula ain't B'tsula El Naira. The definition of B'tsula is a Naira. The Chenu Omer Ba Naira Typus Mara Ma'oid B'tsula. So therefore, the reason for Rabbi Eliezer saying that a Kohen Gadol should not marry a Tana is again from Psukim. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Pani Habala Pnuya Shaloi L'Shemishis Asazayna. We know that halacha, and Amar Rav Amram ain't halacha Rabbi Eliezer. We do not pass like Rabbi Eliezer. Rather, Pani Habala Pnuya is not a zayin. Okay, have a wonderful Shabbos and a wonderful day, and Mitzvah we will learn tomorrow, and Bez Hashem Shabbos.
Okay, what did you think of the